Aruni is the sole new operator from Operation Neon Dawn. She's a 2-2 defender with a passive ability of an enhanced melee attack that creates a hole roughly the size of Mira's secondary shotgun from point blank range. This allows Aruni to create rotates, one-hit barricades including castles, and to open up tons of angles for her teammates and herself. On top of being a prep phase god, Aruni has access to one of the best suited kits to wasting attackers' time and is a very strong addition to the defensive lineup. Let's get right into the specifics. Aruni has access to the P10 Roni or the Mark 14 EBR. Both of these guns have more limited selections of attachments than their original owners. Aruni's Roni only has access to up to 1x sights, and the Mark 14 can only run up to 1.5 instead of Dokubi's 3x. On top of this, the barrel selections are more limited for the Mark 14 as well. You can only run suppressor or no barrel. But anyways, let's get into the specifics. Starting with the P10 Roni, this is personally one of my favorite weapons on defense, with close to if not the lowest recoil of any automatic weapon in the game. To counteract this, it has low damage and a small caliber, but the fire rate more than makes up for it and shreds enemies with ease. It's super easy to run out of ammo with this, so you should be really careful with your ammo management. So looking at the barrel attachments, you can see some clear differences between the options. Obviously, the gun doesn't have a ton of recoil to begin with, but Flash Hider will split this up into two patterns that split off to the left and right respectively. These are pretty consistent, but again, it is two separate paths. On the other hand, Compensator tightens up the spread into pretty much one column. And finally, Muzzle Brake is essentially the same as no barrel, but a little bit tighter. In my personal opinion, Compensator is the best barrel to run because it is very consistent in terms of how you have to pull down, making complete mastery much easier when it comes to the horizontal recoil. If you're running Flash Hider, it might be a little bit easier to pull down on, but keep in mind that you're going to be split between pulling left and pulling right half the time. Also, keep in mind that Suppressor and Extended Barrel don't affect recoil, and I wouldn't consider running Suppressor anyways. The gun already does very little damage, and Suppressor just makes it kind of useless. On Mozzie, you could maybe justify running the Extended Barrel, but with the Aruni you only have a 1x scope, so I wouldn't recommend it either. Compensator is going to be the way to go. You can run any sight, it just comes down to personal preference. Personally, the Hollow and Reflex are equally good for me, but again, it's up to you. For your second option, you have the Mark 14 EBR. This was originally Dokubi's hard-hitting DMR with a solid fire rate, medium to high damage, and low recoil. With a 1.5x, it feels well adapted to a defense setting and isn't really a poor choice. One thing that Ubisoft has done really well in recent seasons is improving weapon balancing. Older operators like Habana and Mira only have one real option for their primary, but both of Aruni's options are very solid weapons. However, I will say that this gun's very limited in the attachments you can run. You don't have any recoil changing attachments, only suppressor. And because of this, it's probably the only non-shotgun that I would recommend running no attachment on. For your full loadout, I would recommend no barrel, the 1.5x, and the angled grip due to the low overall recoil and the ability to take full advantage of the range and damage provided by a DMR on defense. Choosing between the two guns is situational, but I would have to say personally that I would go with the P10 Roni more often than not. Apart from the small magazine, the gun really has no downsides. The gun's basically a headshot machine. If you really want, you can run the Mark 14, but you really don't have a use for it outside of super specific situations. Now let's look at our secondary gadgets. Aruni can run either barbed wire or a bulletproof camera. I would say you should be running barbed wire 99% of the time, with the bulletproof cams being pretty lackluster outside of specific strats. Aruni is a real utility and time-burning powerhouse with her gadget and 2 barbed wire, so this is normally the most optimal selection. Now let's take a look at her gadget and playstyle. Aruni has access to 3 Surya gates. These are indestructible laser denial devices that can be placed on walls, door frames, window frames, and hatches. They will cover the entire opening and can be placed on either side of everything except for doors. On doors, the only difference is that there will be an opening on the bottom, similar to barricades. These laser gates will burn and deal 30 damage to attackers if they run through. They will also destroy any throwable or gadget that they come in contact with. If anything comes into contact with the gate, it will be overloaded and disabled for 30 seconds. However, there is a short time after overloading the gadget that damage can still be dealt or where a second piece of utility can still be burned. Once the 30 seconds are up, the gadget will unfold to the top and it must be shot to be rearmed. There are a few special interactions you should keep in mind though. Twitch's drone cannot disable the gate unless you throw it through, and Thatcher will only disable the gate for the standard 10 seconds if not thrown right into the gate. Something like Sledge's hammer or shield melee attack will not disable the gate. On top of this, Maestro's and Zero's lasers can trigger the rearming. Finally, another gadget that is in the way of the gate, including Mira's windows, deployable shields, bulletproof cameras, and more, will prevent the gate from being deployed. You will either have to move the gadget out of the way or choose a different spot for your gates. While defender gadgets can trigger Aruni's gates, defenders themselves physically cannot take damage from the gates. When close to the gate, defenders will be detected and it will shut off automatically. The border will become white until defenders move away. This does provide a cue for attackers. If the gate is disabled like this, you know a defender is going to be nearby. Now, I could sit here and go through every Aruni setup for every map, team comp, and objective, but that would take literal hours. Instead of wasting my time and yours, I've made a quick checklist that will help you determine if your setup is solid. Basically, you want to be accomplishing 3 goals with your gate placements. 1. Inconveniences attackers. To do this, your gate should be placed on critical entryways that require attackers to either burn utility or take damage to get through. Placing gates between sites is normally less useful than a door that leads directly into one site from another room or hallway. If you notice patterns in how your enemies push, adapt your setup mid-game and try to place them in high traffic areas. If you do this, you either force attackers to dump utility or spend lots of valuable time rotating over to another area of the map. 2. Your gate should be easy to reset. Aruni's not Kapkan. She isn't just a place and forget sort of operator. You need to place your gates with the intention of rearming them late into the round if they are overloaded by attackers. You or a teammate shouldn't have to expose themselves greatly to shoot the gate, and you shouldn't really be placing them across the map most of the time. If you or another teammate are hard roaming and holding a critical part of the map, you can place in that location, but still make sure it covers the other points. And finally, eases pressure. Perhaps Aruni's greatest asset is her ability to relieve pressure on parts of the map. On sites like Oregon's top floor, there are 2 critical doors and 1 critical window. Trophy door, top white, and big window. By placing gates on these 3 locations, you accomplish the first 2 goals, and you also accomplish the third. Now you'll have a sound cue when someone tries to push through. This means that your wall denial can focus better on their task, you're free to cycle cams, and your roamers will have an important buffer that will buy enough time for them to flank. Aruni serves an equivalent purpose to Castle in this regard, but is stronger in terms of her loadout and the reusable nature of her gadget. Setups are really simple with this checklist. If you meet all 3 criteria, you're using the gadget right. It doesn't require a ton of thinking, and it's really easy to do, making Aruni a pretty easy operator to pick up. However, that isn't to say that there aren't more advanced ways to use Aruni's gadget, one of which is Aruni tricking. Aruni tricking is a mechanic that was found nearly as soon as Aruni was playable in Neon Dawn's closed build. Basically, this takes advantage of the gadget's proximity sensor by having Aruni place her gate on the outside of a commonly breached wall. A defender will then stand or crouch next to the inside of the wall, disabling the lasers. If you hear a hard breach using their gadget on the wall, you walk away, enabling the lasers and destroying the gadget in the process. This is a cool interaction, but this can be countered pretty easily with vertical gameplay, Thatcher, or even nades in some cases. Aruni is relatively controversial. There's a clip of Sergio on Twitter where he's dying to an Aruni gadget with no other option. This is admittedly super frustrating, but I'll give my opinion as to why this isn't necessarily as big of a problem as people will think. Defending a bomb site is the main goal of a defender. They can do this by running out time or eliminate all the attackers. These are the most commonly accepted win conditions in Siege. However, it should be noted that with these new operators that there are new win conditions. For example, people have complained in the past about how a Monty versus a Clash in 1v1 is unfair. The Clash will always win. The Clash can just shock the Monty down and he can't do anything about it. However, I will argue that this is also a win condition of Clash. Clash's win condition here is to get an isolated 1v1 where she can't be killed easily. If Clash gets into this situation, she deserves the win and the defense wins the round. Regardless of how frustrating this is and how gimmicky it can seem, this doesn't happen very often, and if it does happen, that's a failure of the attackers. Similarly, in the case of Sergio's clip specifically, he's already in a 1v4 as a Maverick. Not to mention the fact that he's not even running grenades on Maverick, but that's besides the point. The defenders are already in a hugely advantageous scenario. They should win this round. Again, it's still a 1v2. Sergio has little to no intel, and when he jumps in the window bottom white, he gets an admittedly really nice shot on a defender peeking top white. It's a 1v1 with little time left and he's low HP. So here, this is Aruni's win condition. If you meet these very specific conditions of low HP, no utility, and low time, Aruni deserves to win this round. Now granted, this is when Aruni was a much newer operator, but now that people have that in mind, you should be fully aware of this and do everything in your power to avoid this if you're playing against an Aruni. I actually do want to make a dedicated video to this topic, but that'll come later. So in essence, while Aruni is very frustrating to play against in situations like this is basically just a lot of really unfortunate variables lining up that end up forcing a free win for defenders. In summary, Aruni is essentially an upgraded castle that can single-handedly set up a site, gather intel passively, slow attackers, and even force a win for defenders in certain circumstances. With excellent weapons, good mobility, and a flexible gadget, bringing in a Rooney is almost never a poor choice to make. On top of this, she's relatively easy to play with simple to learn but surprisingly complex mechanics, forgiving weapons, and a playstyle that is not limited by her gadgets in any way. A Rooney is definitely worth the 25,000 round price tag, and if you haven't already, I would recommend that you do pick her up. She's really important to learn. She teaches a lot of good fundamentals about Siege, and you don't need a ton of mechanical knowledge to be able to impact the round positively for your team.